What if everything you thought you knew about Prince Harry wasn't entirely true? What if the charming, rebellious royal you've seen on magazine covers, late-night shows, and red carpets, carefully crafting his image for the world, suddenly had every claim fact-checked, live, on television, in front of millions? That's exactly what happened when Graham Norton, Britain's sharpest, wittiest, and arguably most fearless talk show host, confronted Prince Harry on his stage. And the reason? Receipts, clear, undeniable, and at times shocking contradictions between the stories Harry told in his explosive memoir, Spare, and the many interviews, documentaries, and media appearances he had given over the years. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a moment that nobody saw coming. Viewers at home, fans of the royal family, and even media experts were left holding their breath. Here was a prince who had spent decades meticulously crafting his public persona, someone who had captured the sympathy of millions by presenting himself as the victim of royal protocol, media scrutiny, and family betrayal. But Graham Norton, armed with his trademark charm, biting humor, and an arsenal of receipts, was about to dismantle that carefully constructed narrative. The tension was palpable even before Harry walked onto the stage. The audience, a mix of celebrity enthusiasts, royal watchers, and everyday fans, could sense the undercurrent of drama. Cameras zoomed in on the meticulously arranged set, glinting lights reflecting off polished surfaces, capturing every reaction, every twitch, every blink. There was an unspoken question hanging in the air. Would Harry maintain his composure, or would the confrontation expose cracks in his story that he could no longer hide? Harry entered the studio with the familiar confidence of a man who knows cameras are always rolling and public opinion is always watching. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was something different this time, something the cameras couldn't fully capture: anticipation, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Graham, ever the professional, welcomed him with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was an energy in the room that was almost electric, a mix of entertainment, curiosity, and a simmering tension that threatened to boil over at any moment. And then it began. With the casual warmth of someone sharing a friendly anecdote, Graham started probing. But what seemed at first like harmless conversation quickly shifted. Within minutes, the host had Harry cornered, presenting him with contradictions so striking that even casual viewers could see the problem. Harry had written in Spare that he first noticed Meghan Markle in 2016 on Instagram, in a short video where she appeared with a Snapchat dog filter. It was a quirky, modern, and relatable origin story. Yet, Graham presented the engagement interview Harry and Meghan had given in 2017, in which they clearly described being set up on a blind date by a mutual friend. No Instagram, no Snapchat, just old-fashioned matchmaking. The discrepancy was subtle, yet it immediately raised eyebrows. How could a man whose every action was scrutinized by cameras and reporters misremember, or change, the story of the most public romance of the decade? But this was just the beginning. Graham had, in his hand, a meticulously prepared dossier of receipts, contradictions, and timelines. Each page, each note, each citation peeled back another layer of the narrative Harry had carefully curated, where he had claimed intimacy and personalization in the engagement ring, emphasizing the emotional connection to his late mother's diamonds. Past interviews and statements from royal sources told a different story. Not only did accounts differ on how the ring was designed, but they contradicted Harry's own narrative in Spare about where the ring was made and what it represented. And the audience could sense it. These weren't minor inconsistencies. These were the foundations of his personal and romantic narrative, and they were being questioned on live television. Then came the confrontation over the alleged fight with his brother, Prince William. In Spare, Harry describes a moment at Nottingham Cottage in 2019 where William attacked him physically, pushing him onto a dog bowl. A shocking revelation, certainly, but when compared to Harry's 2019 interview with ITV journalist Tom Bradby, a different story emerges. Back then, Harry described the rift as emotional, saying he and William were on different paths, downplaying any physical altercation. Suddenly, the violent scene in the book seems less like a spontaneous memory and more like a dramatic choice, save for the narrative impact of Spare. Graham, ever the masterful interrogator, didn't need to say much. The audience could feel the tension as he silently presented the evidence, letting the contrast speak for itself. Memory is tricky, especially when it involves trauma. Harry's recollections of his mother's death, another critical part of his narrative, were scrutinized next. In Spare, he recalls vividly being woken by his father, Charles, at Balmoral, who broke the news gently. "Darling boy, Mummy's been in a car crash." Yet previous interviews and documentaries suggest that Harry had blocked much of the memory out, claiming he only remembered walking behind the coffin, in shock, unable to process the grief. Was this a case of memory reshaping over time, or was it a deliberate narrative choice for his book? Graham didn't offer commentary. He simply laid out the contradictions, letting the audience make their judgment. By now, the room was thick with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Harry as Graham continued to navigate the maze of inconsistencies, including the high-profile confrontation between Meghan and Kate over the bridesmaid dress for Princess Charlotte. Harry wrote that Meghan cried after Kate confronted her, while Meghan, in her 2021 Oprah interview, claimed the opposite, that Kate made her cry and later apologized. And as if that weren't enough, leaked palace staff accounts added yet another perspective. In the world of royal storytelling, truth seems to bend like light through a prism, each angle revealing a different color, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. Graham's approach was methodical. He didn't rely on theatrics or excessive commentary. Instead, he allowed the receipts, contradictions, and timeline inconsistencies to tell the story. He challenged Harry where necessary, interrupted when the answers seemed evasive, and created an atmosphere that was both confrontational and almost clinical in its dissection of facts versus narrative embellishments. The audience could feel the weight of history pressing down in the studio. Every contradiction Graham laid bare was not just about minor details. It was about the very narrative Harry had spent years cultivating, one that positioned him as the rebellious, misunderstood royal who defied protocol, defied the press, and defied family expectations to find love and carve his own path. These were not simple slip-ups. Each discrepancy challenged the authenticity of Spare, a book that had been marketed as a candid, intimate look into Harry's private world. Viewers began to realize that what they were witnessing was more than an interview. It was a reckoning. What made this confrontation particularly captivating was Graham's approach. Unlike typical tabloid exposés or social media threads that cherry-pick quotes to shame or vilify, Graham structured the dialogue with precision. He allowed the contrasts to emerge naturally, giving Harry opportunities to explain or justify his recollections. Yet, the evidence was relentless. For instance, the discussion about Meghan's engagement ring revealed not just inconsistencies in sourcing, but also a deeper tension between narrative and reality. Royal sources claimed the ring was commissioned from London jewelers, Cleve & Company, while Harry's book emphasized the sentimental attachment to Diana's diamonds. This subtle omission of the commissioning process was not just a minor detail. It suggested a deliberate crafting of a more emotionally resonant story. And then there was the issue of the physical altercation with William. To the casual observer, one might argue that memory is fluid and emotions can distort recollection. Yet Graham's presentation of interviews and prior statements left little room for such an excuse. By juxtaposing Harry's earlier ITV statements with the vivid account in Spare, the host effectively asked a question that hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. Why wait until the book to reveal this? The implication was clear. If Harry had felt genuinely threatened or wronged in 2019, why would he downplay it in interviews at the time, only to highlight it later when selling a narrative? The audience felt the tension rise, as if watching a courtroom drama unfold in real time. The confrontation about Diana's death added yet another layer of complexity. Grief, memory, and trauma are deeply personal, and few could blame Harry if his recollections evolved over time. Yet the stark contrast between a vivid, detailed memory in Spare and previous claims of blocked recollection could not be ignored. Graham's subtle interrogation style, presenting evidence without overt judgment, forced viewers to consider a difficult possibility, that certain memories were selectively presented to evoke sympathy or narrative impact. It was a careful, almost surgical dismantling of the memoir's credibility, and Harry was on the defensive, walking a fine line between explaining and defending, between truth and perception. Perhaps the most emotionally charged segment involved the confrontation over the Meghan-Kate bridesmaid dress incident. Royal weddings are a crucible for personal tensions, but this story had taken on a life of its own, fueled by interviews, leaked palace staff accounts, and the book's dramatic retelling. By laying out these multiple perspectives, Harry's account in Spare, Meghan's version in the Oprah interview, and insider leaks, Graham highlighted the fluidity of the narrative. Each version seemed slightly different, each with its own emotional weight. The audience, already invested in the drama, was left to parse truth from embellishment. And Harry, usually confident under public scrutiny, had to navigate the treacherous waters of contradicting accounts on live television, with no safety net. The tension reached a peak when Graham, with characteristic wit and precision, labeled Harry a fake royal storyteller. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't delivered with melodrama. It was stated calmly, matter-of-factly, like a judge delivering a verdict. And yet, the effect was seismic. The words hung in the studio, bouncing off the walls, penetrating every camera lens, and resonating with viewers at home. This wasn't an accusation in a tabloid article or a social media post. This was a direct, in-person challenge to Harry's narrative authority, delivered by one of Britain's most respected and influential media figures. At this point, it became clear why this segment would dominate headlines, trending online for days and fueling endless debate. The combination of a high-profile subject, meticulous preparation, undeniable contradictions, and a host unafraid to confront his guest created the perfect storm. Analysts and royal watchers later described it as one of the most compelling television moments involving the royal family in recent history. Critics praised Graham's professionalism, noting that he didn't sensationalize or embellish. He simply presented the facts and allowed the narrative to unfold organically. Yet the drama was undeniable. For viewers, the impact went beyond royal gossip. It was a lesson in scrutiny, in holding public figures accountable, and in understanding that narratives, even those crafted by those closest to us, can shift over time. The confrontation also exposed the tension between media narrative, personal memoir, and public perception. Harry had presented himself in Spare as brutally honest, yet these inconsistencies, laid bare by Graham, forced audiences to reconsider the authenticity of his storytelling. As the introduction to this video draws to a close, it is essential to recognize the stakes. What unfolded on Graham Norton's stage was not just entertainment. It was a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the intersection of royalty, media, and personal narrative. It was a moment that exposed contradictions, challenged public perception, and demanded accountability. And it set the stage for an in-depth exploration of each receipt Graham presented. The Instagram story, the engagement ring, the fight with William, the recollection of Diana's death, and the bridesmaid dress clash. Each piece meticulously dissected and analyzed in the sections that follow. This introduction, rich with tension and anticipation, serves as the gateway to an extraordinary narrative. It frames the story, contextualizes the stakes, and primes the audience for a detailed, chapter-by-chapter unraveling of Prince Harry's memoir versus his historical statements. In the next sections, viewers will be guided through each contradiction, presented with evidence, expert commentary, and emotional analysis, building a comprehensive picture that is as gripping as it is revelatory. By the end of this video, audiences will not just understand what happened on Graham Norton's stage. They will feel the full weight of the confrontation, the impact of the contradictions, and the broader implications for one of the most scrutinized public figures of our time. The story of how Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first met has been told and retold countless times, each iteration polished, packaged, and presented to the public in a way that reinforces the fairy tale narrative of modern romance. But the account presented in Spare seems to diverge from the tale the couple shared publicly during interviews leading up to their engagement. On Graham Norton's stage, this discrepancy became a focal point, and the tension was palpable from the moment the subject was introduced. In Spare, Harry recounts noticing Meghan in 2016 through Instagram, describing the moment with meticulous detail. He claims to have seen her in a video posted by a mutual friend, where a playful Snapchat dog filter adorned her face, giving her a whimsical, lighthearted appearance. This seemingly small detail carried enormous narrative weight. It framed their meeting in the context of modern technology, social media serendipity, and the almost cinematic chance encounter that would ignite a royal love story. It painted Harry as a man captivated at first sight, enchanted not just by Meghan's presence, but by the whimsical, modern medium through which he first observed her. In his book, this version of events conveyed a sense of immediacy, intimacy, and authenticity, a moment of private recognition that was almost cinematic in its delivery. Yet when Graham Norton confronted Harry with the engagement interview from 2017, a different story emerged. In that interview, both Harry and Meghan explained that they were introduced through a mutual friend, but there was no mention of Instagram, Snapchat filters, or any digital intermediaries. The engagement interview depicted a more traditional form of connection, a setup orchestrated by someone they both trusted, emphasizing the deliberate, intentional aspect of their introduction rather than the serendipity suggested in Spare. Harry and Meghan's engagement interview presented a narrative where human agency, social connections, and personal initiative were central. It highlighted their social networks, the role of friends, and the conventional courtship practices expected in circles adjacent to royalty, albeit modernized for a contemporary audience. This contrast, which Graham laid bare for viewers, was striking. It was not merely a matter of small inconsistencies or faded memories. It raised fundamental questions about narrative construction, authenticity, and the interplay between private experience and public storytelling. Why, the audience might ask, would Harry choose to recast the story of their first meeting in a way that diverged so sharply from a widely publicized interview conducted only a year later? Was it simply a matter of artistic license, a way to craft a more compelling story for readers of Spare, or was there a deeper, more deliberate strategy to present himself as a more independent, modern royal, navigating a world increasingly defined by technology and social media? Graham's line of questioning, calm but incisive, forced these questions into the public consciousness, compelling viewers to weigh the evidence themselves. What made this particular contradiction so compelling was the interplay of memory, perception, and public image. On the one hand, human memory is notoriously unreliable. Details shift, embellishments creep in, and recollections can be reframed with time. Harry, like anyone, might genuinely remember noticing Meghan on Instagram first, even if the initial introduction was mediated through a friend. Memory is subjective, and emotional resonance can sometimes amplify certain elements while diminishing others. On the other hand, the deliberate presentation of this Instagram moment in a published memoir is not merely a private recollection. It is a public declaration, a conscious choice about how a story is framed and which details are highlighted. By presenting the Instagram story as the primary narrative, Spare effectively reshapes the origin myth of one of the most scrutinized royal relationships of the modern era. The engagement interview itself, conducted in front of cameras and broadcast to millions, was part of a carefully choreographed media moment, intended to showcase the couple's chemistry, charm, and relatability. In that context, the absence of any mention of Instagram or social media first impressions is significant. It suggests that the public-facing story was intentionally structured to emphasize social connection and mutual introduction, aligning with expectations of royal propriety and narrative coherence. Spare, however, presents a story that breaks from that framework, foregrounding the digital and the spontaneous, creating a sense of immediacy and contemporary relevance that contrasts sharply with the more traditional account. Graham's confrontation highlighted this tension with precision, asking Harry to reconcile these two competing narratives and prompting the audience to consider the implications. Beyond the facts themselves, the reaction of viewers and commentators underscored the cultural and emotional stakes. Social media exploded with comparisons, screenshots, and side-by-side analyses, as fans, critics, and media outlets dissected the discrepancy. Analysts pointed out that this was not simply a harmless inconsistency. It was emblematic of a broader pattern, a potential strategy to reshape public perception in ways that might favor the narrative of self-made independence, romantic destiny, and emotional authenticity. In other words, the Instagram story was not just about a first encounter. It was about control over the story, about who gets to define the origin of this highly publicized romance. On stage, Graham Norton did not merely present these facts, he contextualized them. He reminded the audience that narrative control is one of the most potent tools available to public figures, particularly those living under relentless media scrutiny. By comparing the Instagram account in Spare with the engagement interview, he framed the discrepancy as a study in narrative authority, asking viewers to consider not just the facts themselves, but the choices behind them. Why highlight a moment mediated by technology rather than a personal introduction orchestrated by friends? What does this say about the intended audience, the desired perception, and the shaping of a public persona? Harry, for his part, attempted to navigate this confrontation with the grace expected of someone accustomed to media exposure, yet the tension was evident. His explanations, while polite, struggled to fully reconcile the two accounts. The audience could sense the challenge he faced. The need to maintain credibility, protect the emotional truth of his personal experience, and defend the integrity of his memoir, all while under the critical eye of one of Britain's most respected media figures. Graham's calm, deliberate presentation left little room for deflection, making it clear that the discrepancy was not being examined as a trivial detail, but as a meaningful divergence with implications for trust, authenticity, and narrative ownership. Interestingly, the Instagram moment, while seemingly minor, also illuminated generational and cultural shifts in the ways relationships are initiated and perceived. Harry's framing of the encounter as mediated by digital platforms highlighted his awareness of contemporary culture, where social media and technology play central roles in personal connection. By contrast, the engagement interview's more traditional account emphasized human networks and intentional matchmaking. The juxtaposition revealed a tension between the personal and the public, the digital and the human, the private memory and the public narrative, a tension that Graham masterfully brought to the fore. In dissecting this first encounter, the segment also explored the emotional subtext of Harry's storytelling choices. Presenting the Instagram story in Spare may have been a way to assert agency, to craft a version of events that emphasizes his autonomy in pursuing love. It paints a picture of a man captivated and proactive, noticing Meghan in a moment of serendipity, rather than merely responding to an orchestrated introduction. In a sense, the memoir's account elevates Harry's role from participant to initiator, shaping perception in subtle but significant ways. Graham's questioning exposed this layer, prompting viewers to consider not only what happened, but why it was presented in this way. By the end of the segment, it was clear that this was more than a simple inconsistency. It was a microcosm of the broader themes that would permeate the memoir and the subsequent discussion: narrative control, authenticity, and the complex interplay between private recollection and public representation. The audience was left with a clear understanding that in the world of high-profile relationships, even small discrepancies can carry enormous weight. And as the cameras cut to the audience, the tension was tangible, a reminder that storytelling, especially for someone in Harry's position, is never neutral. It is always strategic, always impactful, and always under scrutiny. The story behind Meghan Markle's engagement ring has long been a subject of fascination for the public. Engagement rings, after all, carry symbolic weight beyond mere ornamentation. They are a reflection of personal taste, emotional significance, and, in the case of royals, a window into the intersection of tradition, family heritage, and public expectation. Harry's account in Spare sought to capture this multi-layered symbolism, presenting a deeply personal and emotional narrative that resonated with many readers. Yet, when Graham Norton brought this story onto his stage, the subtle contradictions between Harry's memoir and earlier public statements created a ripple of disbelief, leaving viewers questioning the authenticity of the tale they had been told. In Spare, Harry emphasizes the emotional significance of the ring, particularly its connection to his mother, Princess Diana. He explains that the ring was designed with elements directly sourced from Diana's own collection of jewelry. 2 diamonds, taken from Diana's earrings, were incorporated into the design, giving the piece a dual symbolism: the continuation of Diana's legacy and a tangible link to a mother he deeply revered and mourned. The narrative in the book frames this act not merely as a gesture of love towards Meghan, but also as a careful homage to Diana, symbolically intertwining the past and the present, grief and new beginnings. For readers, this framing transforms the ring from a mere accessory into an artifact loaded with personal, emotional, and historical meaning. However, Harry's account in Spare notably leaves out certain logistical details, particularly concerning where and how the ring was acquired. The memoir emphasizes emotion, memory, and legacy, but glosses over the practical elements of commissioning or purchasing the piece. This omission, while seemingly minor, became a point of contention when Graham Norton confronted Harry with past interviews that painted a slightly different picture. In interviews leading up to their engagement, Meghan had described the process as collaborative, indicating that the couple had designed the ring together during a trip to Botswana. This narrative emphasized partnership, shared creativity, and mutual decision-making, portraying a romanticized yet grounded process of designing a piece that symbolized their commitment. Adding further complexity, royal sources and jewelry experts clarified that the ring had been made by Cleave & Company, a reputable London jeweler with decades of experience crafting jewelry for the royal family. According to these accounts, Harry worked closely with the jeweler to create a bespoke design that would both honor Diana's memory and suit Meghan's personal style. This professional and practical aspect of the ring's creation contrasts with the memoir's more intimate, emotion-driven narrative. The public, now aware of these multiple accounts, is left to reconcile them. Was the ring the product of a collaborative effort between Harry and Meghan in Botswana, or primarily a tribute orchestrated by Harry through the skilled hands of a royal jeweler? Graham Norton's questioning highlighted this tension with precision. He did not merely present the different accounts. He framed them in a way that underscored the broader implications. By juxtaposing the romanticized, memoir-driven narrative with the practical, source-based accounts from past interviews and insiders, he prompted the audience to consider the nuances of storytelling. Why choose to emphasize one element over another? Why present the ring's emotional resonance while omitting its practical creation? These questions, while subtle, cut to the heart of credibility, narrative construction, and the shaping of public perception. What makes this contradiction particularly compelling is the way it intersects with public expectations of royal transparency and authenticity. The British royal family has historically navigated the delicate balance between personal privacy and public fascination, and every detail, no matter how small, is scrutinized. Engagement rings, in particular, are potent symbols of this scrutiny. They are evaluated not only for their aesthetic qualities, but also for their origins, design process, and the symbolism encoded in their materials. By presenting a version of events in Spare that focuses almost entirely on emotion while leaving out logistical details, Harry risked creating a perception that the narrative was selectively curated to enhance dramatic impact, rather than strictly adhere to factual completeness. Moreover, the public reaction to this segment of Graham Norton's show underscores the heightened stakes. Social media threads exploded with debates, comparisons, and analyses. Fans dissected screenshots of interviews, side-by-side images of the ring's design, and quotes from both the memoir and Meghan's past statements. Many speculated about Harry's motivations for emphasizing certain details over others. Was this selective storytelling a deliberate strategy to reinforce a narrative of deep emotional sensitivity and connection to Diana? Was it an attempt to craft a modern fairy tale romance for readers, emphasizing the emotional over the factual? Or was it simply an oversight, a natural consequence of memory and storytelling biases? The ambiguity itself became a focal point for viewers, inviting discussion, speculation, and critical engagement. Graham Norton's approach to this confrontation was both subtle and incisive. Rather than attacking Harry, he framed the contradictions as opportunities for deeper exploration, prompting the audience to consider not only the facts themselves, but the narrative choices underpinning them. He asked, in effect, what the story of the engagement ring tells us about Harry's broader approach to storytelling, memoir writing, and public image. The ring, therefore, becomes more than an object. It becomes a symbol of the complex interplay between memory, emotion, and the construction of public narratives. It illustrates how even the most seemingly straightforward personal anecdotes can carry layers of meaning, cultural expectation, and strategic framing. The discussion also highlighted the role of Meghan in shaping these narratives. In Spare, Meghan's agency in the ring's design is downplayed, emphasizing Harry's emotional journey and the tribute to his mother. In past interviews, however, Meghan's involvement in the design process is foreground, presenting a collaborative partnership. This discrepancy not only raised questions about factual accuracy, but also touched on broader themes of voice, perspective, and the dynamics of storytelling within high-profile relationships. Who controls the narrative? Whose voice dominates the public account? And how do differing accounts shape public perception of character, intention, and emotional authenticity? Furthermore, the Ring segment provided a lens into the media machinery surrounding royal storytelling. Every element, the memoir, the interviews, the televised appearances, the social media coverage, is part of an intricate ecosystem where narrative, image, and perception intersect. Harry's choices in framing the engagement ring story, when examined against prior interviews, reveal how even small narrative discrepancies can be amplified, analyzed, and politicized in the public domain. Graham Norton's confrontation acted as a microcosm of this dynamic, illustrating how media figures can surface tensions between personal memory and public narrative, inviting scrutiny, debate, and reflection. By the end of the segment, it was evident that the story of Meghan's engagement ring was not merely about jewelry or romance. It was a carefully curated narrative, laden with emotional resonance, historical homage, and selective storytelling. Graham's confrontation illuminated the tension between the personal and the public, between emotion-driven memoir and fact-based reporting. Viewers were left not only with the details of the ring's design, but with a broader understanding of how narratives are constructed, contested, and perceived in the modern media landscape. In this way, the engagement ring became a symbol of the larger conversation about credibility, narrative control, and the shaping of royal myth in the 21st century. The tension between Prince Harry and Prince William has long been a subject of speculation, intrigue, and public fascination. From the outside, their relationship appeared to be the archetype of sibling rivalry and royal duty. Moments of camaraderie intertwined with public appearances, family obligations, and private conflicts that rarely leaked to the media. However, in Harry's memoir Spare, a shocking and highly detailed account emerged that captured the attention of readers worldwide. A depiction of a physical altercation that, if true, dramatically reshapes the public understanding of the brothers' relationship. When Graham Norton confronted Harry on this topic, the stakes were raised even higher, revealing discrepancies between past statements and the book's narrative that left viewers questioning what to believe. In Spare, Harry recounts a heated confrontation with William at Nottingham Cottage in 2019, describing a moment where tensions boiled over physically. According to his account, an argument escalated, resulting in William pushing Harry, who ended up tumbling onto a dog bowl. The description is vivid, almost cinematic in its detail. The emotional intensity, the physical movement, the sharpness of the clash, it all serves to paint a dramatic picture of a relationship strained by pressures, misunderstandings, and personal grievances. For readers, this was more than a simple family spat. It was a glimpse into the raw, unfiltered emotional dynamics of the royal family, an intimate exposure of conflict rarely seen in public life. Yet, this account stands in stark contrast to Harry's prior statements. In a 2019 interview with Tom Bradby for ITV, Harry spoke about the brothers' relationship with measured calm, framing the rift as emotional rather than physical. He described being on different paths, emphasizing diverging life trajectories and differences in personal priorities rather than moments of aggression. While acknowledging tension and disagreements, the narrative was carefully constructed to suggest distance and disconnection, but not violence. This discrepancy between the memoir's graphic description and earlier public comments sparked intense scrutiny. Critics questioned why Harry would omit a physical altercation in one context, only to reveal it later with such dramatic detail. Graham Norton, with his characteristic mix of charm and incisiveness, addressed this discrepancy head-on during the show. He framed the confrontation in a way that highlighted the tension between public persona and private narrative. By presenting the earlier interview side by side with Spare, Graham invited the audience to consider the implications. Was the revelation of a physical altercation a truthful disclosure? previously suppressed due to sensitivity and discretion, or was it a narrative device, chosen for its dramatic impact in the memoir? The questioning probed deeper than mere factual accuracy. It questioned intention, credibility, and the shaping of public perception. The broader context of royal family dynamics adds layers of complexity to this story. Sibling relationships are inherently complicated, especially under the intense scrutiny of public life. The pressures of duty, expectation, media attention, and personal grief create an environment in which small disagreements can escalate, misunderstandings can fester, and private conflicts can be amplified by external observers. Within this framework, a single incident like the Nottingham Cottage altercation carries symbolic weight. It is not just a physical encounter. It is emblematic of long-standing tensions, unresolved grievances, and the challenges of balancing familial loyalty with personal identity. The public's reaction to the revelation in Spare was immediate and polarizing. Social media platforms filled with discussions, memes, and analyses. Fans dissected timelines, interviews, and historical events, attempting to reconcile the dramatic account in the memoir with Harry's previous portrayals. Some argued that the physical altercation was plausible, given the intense pressures and emotions surrounding the brothers during that period. Others suggested that the memoir may have amplified or dramatized events for narrative effect, creating a story that would captivate readers and reinforce Harry's portrayal as the candid, truth-telling royal who dares to expose hidden realities. Experts in royal affairs and psychology weighed in, noting that sibling rivalry is often a mix of emotional and behavioral conflicts. In high-stakes environments like the royal family, small disputes can manifest in exaggerated narratives later as individuals attempt to process experiences, assert identity, and communicate emotional truth. Harry's memoir, in this lens, can be seen not merely as a factual account, but as an emotional narrative, shaped by memory, perspective, and the desire to convey deeper truths about family dynamics. Graham Norton's questioning, by contrast, forced a confrontation between emotional truth and objective fact, a tension that sits at the heart of public intrigue. Additionally, the timing of the revelation in Spare contributes to the story's impact. By presenting this altercation years after the event, Harry introduces an element of retrospection, a moment viewed through the lens of reflection, interpretation, and narrative construction. This delay raises questions about memory reliability, narrative shaping, and the selective disclosure of information. Why reveal it now? Was the timing motivated by a desire to provide insight, to dramatize, or to craft a compelling storyline for the memoir? The question lingers, inviting audiences to engage with the story critically, weighing narrative intention against factual accuracy. Graham Norton's role as a mediator of this revelation was pivotal. By juxtaposing Harry's previous statements with the memoir's account, he framed the incident not just as a family disagreement, but as a case study in storytelling, perception, and media dynamics. He asked viewers to consider, how do narratives evolve over time? How does public expectation influence what is revealed or withheld? And crucially, how does a public figure balance honesty, discretion, and narrative impact when recounting intimate family experiences? The Nottingham Cottage confrontation thus becomes a lens through which the audience can explore larger questions about credibility, memory, and the construction of public narratives. The segment also illuminated the interplay between public fascination and private reality. Royal conflicts are not merely personal. They are performative, symbolic, and scrutinized at every turn. A physical altercation between two high-profile siblings is loaded with implications for image, public sympathy, and media narratives. By presenting a vivid, emotionally charged account in Spare, Harry shifts the focus from subtle tension to overt drama, inviting readers to experience the intensity of family dynamics in a visceral way. Graham Norton's role in probing this narrative amplified the tension, creating a space where both the memoir's account and the prior interviews could be critically examined and contrasted. Moreover, the incident underscores the challenges of reconciling personal truth with public expectation. Harry's experience of the altercation, as conveyed in Spare, is intensely personal, filtered through his memory, emotions, and perspective. Public perception, however, operates in a different register, shaped by prior statements, media coverage, and collective narratives about royal decorum, family harmony, and emotional restraint. The divergence between private experience and public expectation creates fertile ground for scrutiny, debate, and interpretation. Graham Norton's confrontation brought this tension to the fore, compelling both Harry and the audience to navigate the space between subjective experience and external accountability. By the end of the segment, the Nottingham Cottage story served multiple purposes. It provided insight into the complex relationship between Harry and William, illuminated the pressures and expectations surrounding royal sibling dynamics, and highlighted the challenges inherent in translating private emotional experiences into public narrative. Graham Norton's skillful questioning underscored the stakes, framing the revelation as both a personal disclosure and a broader commentary on storytelling, credibility, and the management of public image. For viewers, the confrontation offered not only drama and intrigue, but also a deeper understanding of the forces shaping royal narratives in the modern era. The fight, as described, is more than a literal event. It becomes emblematic of the broader themes running throughout Spare: conflict, memory, perception, and the struggle for narrative control. It raises enduring questions about authenticity, selective disclosure, and the intersection of private life with public consumption. By examining this incident in detail, Graham Norton encouraged viewers to look beyond the surface of the story, considering both the emotional truth conveyed and the potential narrative strategies employed. The Nottingham Cottage altercation thus transcends its immediate context, serving as a touchstone for understanding the complex interplay of family dynamics, media scrutiny, and personal narrative in the life of one of the world's most scrutinized families. The death of Princess Diana on August 31, 1997, sent shockwaves through the world, leaving a nation in mourning and a family in profound grief. For Prince Harry, who was just 12 years old at the time, the event was not only a public tragedy, but an intensely personal, life-altering experience. In his memoir Spare, Harry recounts the moment he learned of his mother's death in vivid detail, portraying an emotional landscape that is raw, intimate, and strikingly different from previous accounts he shared publicly. Graham Norton, during his confrontation with Harry on the show, seized upon this discrepancy, asking probing questions about how Harry remembered the day, why certain details appeared only years later in the memoir, and whether the narrative was shaped to heighten emotional resonance. In Spare, Harry describes being awakened at Balmoral Castle by his father, Prince Charles, who delivered the news with an almost gentle gravity. Charles allegedly said, "Darling boy, Mummy's been in a car crash," his tone intended to soften the blow for a 12-year-old already grappling with a complex mix of emotions. Harry paints a picture of disbelief, shock, and a sudden confrontation with mortality. He recalls the surreal nature of the moment. The quiet corridors of the castle, the hushed tones of staff, the surreal awareness that the world outside was about to change forever. The specificity of this memory, the words used, the sequence of events, the emotional response, creates an immersive narrative for readers, making them feel the gravity and disorientation that Harry experienced as a child. However, this account contrasts sharply with statements Harry made in earlier public interviews. In the 2017 BBC documentary Diana, Our Mother, he described his experience differently. He stated that he remembered being in shock, walking behind his mother's coffin, and actively blocking the memory of her death as a psychological defense mechanism. The emphasis was on emotional suppression rather than precise recollection, implying that the details of how he learned of the tragedy were fuzzy, inaccessible, or consciously forgotten. The memoir, by contrast, presents a newly vivid memory, almost cinematic in scope, with precise dialogue and immediate emotional impact. The divergence between these accounts provoked curiosity and, for some critics, skepticism. Why would a child's memory, previously described as fragmented and inaccessible, now appear fully intact and narratively rich? Graham Norton did not shy away from addressing this inconsistency. On his show, he juxtaposed Harry's 2017 statements with the Spare narrative, asking pointedly why the details had changed. Was this a case of retrospective memory reconstructing the event, or a deliberate choice to enhance the memoir's dramatic impact? The line of questioning pushed Harry into a corner, compelling him to navigate the delicate balance between personal truth, emotional narrative, and public perception. The audience was drawn into the tension, wondering whether they were witnessing an authentic recollection of grief or a carefully crafted storytelling device. The context of Harry's childhood further complicates the narrative. Losing a parent at a young age is an experience fraught with trauma, fragmentation, and shifting memories. Psychological research has shown that traumatic events can both suppress and distort memory, leading to partial recollections that evolve over time. For Harry, the passage from childhood to adulthood, coupled with intense media scrutiny and the need to process grief publicly, likely influenced how he internalized and later articulated the event. Spare reflects a matured perspective, a child's raw trauma filtered through years of reflection, therapy, and narrative framing. Graham Norton's challenge was to tease apart the memory itself from the framing applied for public consumption. Public reaction to this account was immediate and intense. Social media platforms, forums, and news outlets erupted with discussions comparing the two narratives. Some viewers empathized with Harry, recognizing that the process of grief is nonlinear and memory is inherently malleable. Others suggested that the dramatic specificity of the memoir could be interpreted as an attempt to amplify emotional engagement, potentially at the expense of consistency with prior statements. Analysts debated the ethical and psychological implications of revealing such intimate childhood moments in a memoir, particularly given the global audience and the enduring fascination with Diana's life and death. Critics and commentators also explored the broader implications of Harry's storytelling choices. Presenting a detailed, almost novelistic account of his mother's death places the reader at the emotional center of the royal tragedy, creating intimacy and immediacy. Yet, by contrast, his previous statements suggested distance, suppression, and partial amnesia. The tension between these portrayals raises questions about the nature of memoir itself. Is it a factual account, an emotional truth, or a blend of both? Graham Norton's interrogation of Harry highlighted this tension, encouraging viewers to critically engage with the narrative, consider its psychological underpinnings, and reflect on the broader implications of storytelling, memory, and public persona. Additionally, the discrepancy touches on the dynamics of legacy and perception. Princess Diana's life and death are subjects of enduring global fascination, laden with expectations, mythology, and symbolic resonance. Any new narrative element about her death or the immediate aftermath is bound to attract attention and scrutiny. Harry's decision to include a precise account in Spare transforms the personal memory into a public spectacle, a move that inevitably invites questions about authenticity, intent, and narrative strategy. Graham Norton's confrontation effectively brought these issues to the surface, turning a deeply personal story into a matter of public debate, analysis, and emotional investment. The segment also offered insight into the pressures faced by the royal family in processing grief publicly. Unlike private citizens, royals navigate mourning under constant media surveillance, societal expectation, and historical precedent. The act of recounting Diana's death, whether in interviews or in memoir form, is inherently performative to some extent. It serves both as personal catharsis and as a communication to the public. Spare reflects this dual function, providing readers with an emotionally charged account while simultaneously managing public perception and narrative control. Graham Norton's role was to expose the interplay between these functions, probing the delicate balance Harry navigated between personal disclosure and narrative crafting. Furthermore, Harry's account in Spare serves as a lens for understanding how childhood trauma shapes adult identity. The narrative is suffused with reflections on vulnerability, fear, and resilience, demonstrating how a child's early experiences reverberate across decades. By presenting a clear, detailed memory of learning about his mother's death, Harry conveys the profound psychological impact of the event, while also framing it within a broader story of survival, personal growth, and self-understanding. Graham Norton's questioning illuminated the stakes of this narrative choice, prompting viewers to consider not only the factual consistency, but also the emotional significance of the memory as conveyed to a global audience. Finally, the segment underscores the broader theme of narrative reliability and public accountability. Harry's differing accounts, the BBC documentary versus Spare, highlight the tension between private experience and public storytelling. Audiences are left to weigh the possibility of evolving memory, emotional reconstruction, and narrative framing against the expectation of consistency. Graham Norton's skillful facilitation of this discussion transformed the memoir reading into an interactive exploration of truth, memory, and credibility, encouraging viewers to actively engage with the story, reflect on human cognition and emotion, and grapple with the complexities of public narrative in the modern media landscape. The story of how Harry learned of Diana's death, as explored through Spare and scrutinized on Graham Norton Show, is thus not merely a recounting of a historical event. It is a multi-layered exploration of trauma, memory, narrative construction, public scrutiny, and the intersection of personal and collective history. By presenting a detailed and emotionally immersive account, Harry invites readers and viewers into a deeply intimate moment while simultaneously navigating the challenges of public expectation and narrative reliability. Graham Norton's confrontation, by highlighting discrepancies and asking probing questions, turns this private grief into a public inquiry into authenticity, storytelling, and the complex dynamics of modern royal life. The royal wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in May 2018 was a global event, watched by millions around the world. Yet behind the grandeur, the glitz, and the media spectacle, there were whispers of tension, disagreements, and emotional turmoil, none more talked about than the now infamous bridesmaid dress clash involving Meghan Markle and Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge. In Spare, Harry presents a vivid narrative of this incident, highlighting a moment of intense emotional vulnerability for his wife. However, as Graham Norton confronted him, contrasting this account with previous statements and public interviews, the discrepancies became glaring. The confrontation sparked widespread speculation about narrative reliability, the interplay of media, and the carefully constructed stories within the royal family. In Spare, Harry writes that Meghan was left in tears after Kate confronted her about Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress before the wedding. According to Harry, the confrontation was tense and emotionally charged, with Meghan feeling criticized and undermined by the future queen consort. He emphasizes Meghan's distress, portraying her as overwhelmed, hurt, and frustrated by what should have been a simple pre-wedding conversation about dress arrangements. The narrative paints a scene of vulnerability and human emotion, a royal figure, accustomed to public scrutiny, being caught in a personal storm. The tension is palpable, and Harry's writing provides a detailed window into Meghan's feelings, her anxieties, and the interpersonal complexities within the royal household. Yet, Meghan's own account, provided during the 2021 Oprah Winfrey interview, tells a somewhat different story. She stated that it was she who was brought to tears after Kate's comments, but the context was framed differently. Meghan described a situation where the critique, while upsetting, was not an intentional slight or personal attack. Rather, it was a miscommunication that was later resolved when Kate apologized. The shift in narrative, from Harry's version to Meghan's own description, introduces questions about perspective, interpretation, and the inherent subjectivity of recounting personal experiences. Who experienced the distress more acutely? And how do differing accounts shape public perception, particularly when every word is dissected by global media outlets? Adding further complexity to the story are leaked palace staff accounts and anecdotal recollections from those present behind the scenes. Several palace insiders, speaking anonymously to various media outlets, suggested that the interaction between Meghan and Kate was far less dramatic than either of the public accounts indicated. They described it as a brief disagreement, quickly resolved, and not particularly emotionally charged. The juxtaposition of Harry's intimate narrative, Meghan's recounting, and staff observations demonstrates how stories can diverge depending on perspective, memory, and intention. In this case, the discrepancy became a focal point for critics accusing Harry of embellishing events to heighten the drama within his memoir. Graham Norton, in his signature style, did not hesitate to press Harry on these inconsistencies. On his show, he juxtaposed Harry's memoir account with Meghan's Oprah interview and the leaked staff anecdotes, questioning why the stories did not align. He asked, if Meghan herself says the situation resolved quickly and wasn't as dramatic, why present it in the book as such an emotionally charged confrontation? The question, simple in form yet profound in implication, forced Harry to navigate the delicate territory between loyalty to his wife, fidelity to memory, and the demands of a compelling memoir. The audience watched intently as Harry attempted to reconcile these differences, offering clarifications while maintaining his narrative perspective. Beyond the interpersonal drama, the bridesmaid dress clash story reflects larger dynamics within the royal family, particularly regarding media representation and public perception. Every action, every word, every expression of emotion by members of the royal family is magnified, analyzed, and interpreted by a global audience. Harry's decision to include this story in Spare illustrates the tension between private experience and public storytelling. By presenting the moment in vivid detail, he offers readers an intimate view of the pressures and expectations faced by Meghan, while simultaneously shaping the narrative of their marriage and personal journey. The stakes are high. Any perceived exaggeration or inconsistency can be weaponized by critics or misinterpreted by the public. The story also illuminates the complexities of sibling-in-law relationships within the royal family. Kate and Meghan's interactions, whether genuinely tense or dramatized through narrative, are scrutinized as symbols of broader tensions within the monarchy. Harry's account in Spare frames the incident as a personal and emotional conflict, emphasizing empathy for Meghan and highlighting his protective instincts as a husband. Critics, however, argue that amplifying the moment for dramatic effect may distort reality and contribute to a narrative of rivalry that overshadows actual events. Graham Norton's interrogation of Harry on this point highlighted the fine line between authentic recollection and narrative embellishment, a line that is frequently blurred in memoirs of public figures. Another aspect that emerged from this segment is the psychological dimension of conflict and stress during high-profile events. Weddings, particularly those of royal magnitude, are inherently stressful. The expectations of protocol, media scrutiny, and historical precedent create pressure cooker environments where small disagreements can be magnified. In this context, even a minor critique about a bridesmaid dress can have outsized emotional consequences, especially for individuals unaccustomed to such intense attention. Harry's account captures this psychological reality, portraying Meghan's reaction as a natural human response to an extraordinary situation. However, differing accounts highlight how perception shapes interpretation, reminding audiences that memory, emotion, and perspective are deeply intertwined. Public reaction to the bridesmaid dress clash story has been mixed. Some viewers empathize with Harry's portrayal, recognizing the genuine human emotions involved and appreciating the glimpse into the private challenges faced by Meghan and Harry. Others question the accuracy and intent behind the depiction, suggesting that it serves a narrative purpose, enhancing tension and engagement within the memoir. Social media debates, opinion columns, and online forums dissected the incident, comparing Harry's account with Meghan's Oprah interview and anonymous staff insights. The discussion underscores the broader challenge of navigating truth, perception, and narrative authority in the age of global media. The clash also serves as a microcosm of the broader narrative strategies employed in Spare. Throughout the memoir, Harry presents a series of intimate, emotionally charged moments, interpersonal conflicts, family disagreements, and personal challenges that provide depth and engagement for readers. The bridesmaid dress incident exemplifies this approach, blending anecdotal storytelling, emotional transparency, and personal perspective. Yet, the divergence between accounts demonstrates the tension between subjective memory and objective reality, a tension that Graham Norton skillfully highlighted in his questioning. In conclusion, the Meghan and Kate bridesmaid dress clash, as presented in Spare and scrutinized on Graham Norton's show, is far more than a simple pre-wedding disagreement. It is a lens through which to examine narrative reliability, emotional perception, media scrutiny, and the intricate dynamics of royal relationships. The incident reveals the delicate interplay between personal memory, storytelling, and public expectation, demonstrating how even seemingly minor events can carry significant weight when filtered through the prism of global attention. Graham Norton's confrontation pushed Harry to reflect on these complexities, inviting audiences to consider the intersection of truth, perspective, and narrative in a memoir that straddles the line between personal confession and public spectacle. By exploring this incident in such depth, the audience gains a nuanced understanding of the challenges Harry and Meghan face, the pressures of royal life, and the ways in which narrative can be shaped, interpreted, and contested. The bridesmaid dress clash is not merely a story about fashion or pre-wedding tension. It is a story about memory, perception, loyalty, and the powerful influence of perspective in shaping the public understanding of private lives. The story of how Prince Harry first met Meghan Markle has been told and retold in countless interviews, documentaries, and now, in the pages of Spare. Yet, as Graham Norton revealed in his confrontation on live television, the details Harry presented in his memoir differ in significant ways from earlier public statements and interviews, leaving audiences questioning the accuracy and intent behind his narrative. The discrepancy centers on one seemingly small detail: how Harry first noticed Meghan, but as the scrutiny intensified, it became emblematic of the broader challenges and controversies surrounding Spare and the memoir's portrayal of events. In Spare, Harry recounts that he first saw Meghan on Instagram in 2016 through a mutual friend's video in which she appeared with a Snapchat dog filter. The narrative frames the moment as cinematic, almost whimsical, painting Meghan as a figure whose presence immediately captured Harry's attention. The account emphasizes the role of technology, social media, and modern dating practices, highlighting the contemporary nature of their introduction. Harry portrays the encounter as a mix of chance and serendipity, blending the everyday nature of scrolling through Instagram with the extraordinary outcome of meeting a future wife. This framing is both intimate and accessible, allowing readers to relate to the digital-era romance narrative while also emphasizing the almost fated quality of their meeting. However, this version of events contrasts sharply with previous public accounts, most notably the engagement interview in 2017, where Harry and Meghan presented a different story. In that interview, they explained that they had been set up on a blind date by a mutual friend, completely omitting any mention of Instagram or social media. The engagement interview was widely publicized and praised for its warmth, intimacy, and the seeming authenticity of the couple's interaction. Harry described their first meeting as personal and traditional, emphasizing the connection fostered through direct conversation rather than digital observation. Meghan echoed this narrative, framing the blind date as the origin of their relationship and highlighting the chemistry that developed organically during that first encounter. The discrepancy between the Instagram story in Spare and the blind date story in the engagement interview has fueled a wave of criticism and speculation. Critics argue that Harry may have altered the narrative to create a more dramatic, media-friendly account for the memoir, while supporters suggest that the differing stories reflect nuances in memory, perspective, and storytelling intent. Graham Norton, in his usual probing manner, did not allow Harry to sidestep the issue. He presented the accounts side by side, asking why the memoir emphasized social media rather than the blind date, and whether the change was intentional to make the story more engaging for readers. The line of questioning was sharp, direct, and unrelenting, putting Harry in the difficult position of defending both his memory and his narrative choices. The introduction of Instagram into the story of their first meeting also raises questions about how personal memory intersects with public storytelling. In an era dominated by social media, our recollections of events are often intertwined with digital artifacts, online interactions, and the ways in which technology mediates our experiences. Harry's Instagram account of meeting Meghan may reflect a blend of actual events, memory reconstruction, and narrative enhancement for a global audience. The contrast between the Instagram narrative and the blind date narrative underscores how public figures navigate the tension between truth, narrative engagement, and audience expectation. For Harry, the memoir provided an opportunity to present his version of events in vivid, cinematic terms, but the resulting discrepancies have fueled debate about credibility and authenticity. Additionally, the discrepancy between the two accounts highlights the role of perspective in shaping storytelling. Harry's Instagram narrative emphasizes his experience and perception of the moment, focusing on his initial impression, the charm of modern dating, and the serendipitous nature of the meeting. The engagement interview, on the other hand, reflects a shared narrative, one co-created with Meghan to present their relationship to the public in a polished, emotionally resonant way. The shift between private perspective and public narrative illustrates the challenges of memoir writing, particularly for individuals whose lives are scrutinized by millions and whose every word is analyzed for authenticity. The scrutiny over this narrative divergence also raises broader questions about the relationship between memory and truth. Memory is inherently subjective, shaped by personal experience, emotion, and interpretation. In recounting the story of their first meeting, Harry may have emphasized different elements depending on the context, audience, and narrative objectives. In Spare, the memoir format allowed for a more introspective, detailed, and possibly dramatized version of events, whereas interviews and public appearances required brevity, clarity, and a focus on joint storytelling. Graham Norton's confrontation underscored the tension between these modes of storytelling, pushing Harry to address the implications of presenting divergent accounts to the public. Public reaction to the Instagram versus blind date narrative has been intense. Social media platforms erupted with discussion, debate, and analysis of which account is more credible, with some critics suggesting that the change reflects intentional embellishment, while others defended Harry's account as a natural consequence of personal perspective and memory reconstruction. The discussion highlights the challenges of being a public figure in the digital age, where every statement, interview, and memoir entry is dissected and fact-checked in real time. In this environment, even small discrepancies can become focal points for controversy, shaping public perception and influencing reputations. The significance of this discrepancy is further amplified by the global fascination with the royal family. As one of the most scrutinized couples in modern history, Harry and Meghan's every action and statement is analyzed in minute detail. The story of their first meeting is not just a personal anecdote. It is part of a larger narrative about their relationship, their approach to media, and their public personas. By altering or emphasizing different elements of the story, Harry shapes the public's understanding of his relationship with Meghan, influencing perceptions of authenticity, intimacy, and credibility. Graham Norton's interrogation brought this dynamic to the forefront, highlighting the stakes involved in crafting a narrative that must resonate with both memoir readers and the global public. Another layer to the story involves the interplay between narrative, branding, and media strategy. Spare is not just a memoir. It is a carefully marketed product designed to capture attention, drive sales, and provide insight into a high-profile life. The Instagram narrative adds modernity, relatability, and drama, aligning with contemporary storytelling trends and appealing to a digitally savvy audience. The blind date story, while emotionally authentic, lacks the technological intrigue and serendipitous charm that the Instagram account conveys. This tension between narrative authenticity and audience engagement illustrates the commercial pressures faced by public figures when recounting personal experiences in widely distributed formats. The consequences of the discrepancy also extend to public trust and narrative credibility. When prominent figures present divergent accounts of the same event, audiences are left to question which version is accurate, whether intentional misrepresentation occurred, and what factors influence the storytelling. In Harry's case, Graham Norton's confrontation highlighted these issues in a way that was both direct and compelling, challenging him to explain why his memoir deviated from previous statements and how audiences should interpret the differences. The resulting discussion invites broader reflection on how memoirs, media appearances, and personal storytelling intersect in shaping public perception and understanding. Ultimately, the debate over Harry's first meeting with Meghan underscores the complex interplay between memory, narrative, media, and audience expectation. The divergence between the Instagram story in Spare and the blind date narrative in the engagement interview is more than a trivial detail. It is a case study in how stories are constructed, presented, and interpreted in the public sphere. Graham Norton's questioning brought these issues to the forefront, demonstrating the critical role of media scrutiny, narrative accountability, and the responsibilities of public figures in presenting personal histories. By examining this discrepancy, audiences gain insight into the intricacies of public storytelling, the subjectivity of memory, and the pressures faced by high-profile individuals when sharing personal experiences. The story of the first meeting is emblematic of the broader challenges faced by Harry and Meghan in navigating a life of global attention, where personal narratives are constantly dissected, contested, and interpreted through multiple lenses. The Instagram versus blind date debate invites reflection on how narratives are constructed, the motivations behind storytelling choices, and the implications of divergent accounts in shaping public perception, credibility, and legacy. In conclusion, the story of Harry's first meeting with Meghan, as told in Spare and scrutinized by Graham Norton, illustrates the delicate balance between personal memory, narrative construction, and public accountability. The divergence between the Instagram account and the blind date story highlights the challenges of memoir writing, the subjective nature of memory, and the pressures of being a public figure whose every word is dissected. It also underscores the importance of media scrutiny, narrative consistency, and transparency in shaping public perception. This incident is not merely a minor discrepancy. It is a window into the complexities of modern storytelling, the intersection of private life and public attention, and the enduring fascination with the personal lives of the British royal family. Prince Harry's account of Meghan Markle's engagement ring has been a topic of fascination and debate since the moment he presented it to her. In Spare, he offers a detailed, almost reverential description of the ring, emphasizing the personal and emotional significance embedded in its design. According to Harry, the ring was deeply personal, a symbolic tribute to Meghan and her values, and included diamonds sourced from his late mother, Princess Diana's personal collection. He presents the story as a gesture of love and continuity, linking the past and present, and imbuing the ring with profound familial and emotional resonance. For Harry, the ring is not merely a piece of jewelry. It is a narrative device, a tangible representation of memory, loss, and devotion. Yet, when this account is compared to past interviews, public statements, and insider revelations, discrepancies emerge that raise questions about the accuracy and consistency of Harry's narrative. In previous interviews, Meghan has described the ring as a collaborative creation between the couple during their trip to Botswana. She emphasized her involvement in the design process, framing the ring as a product of their shared taste, style, and values. The Botswana narrative presents a romanticized vision of partnership, adventure, and mutual decision-making, where both parties contributed to the creation of an item that symbolizes their union. Royal sources, however, paint a different picture entirely. According to insiders, the ring was manufactured by Cleave and Company jewelers in London, adhering to established royal protocols and traditions. This account emphasizes a more formal, structured process that contrasts with the intimate, collaborative narrative described by Meghan. The design, while incorporating elements from Diana's collection, was commissioned through traditional channels, reflecting the logistical and procedural realities of royal life. In this version, the romanticized Botswana story functions more as a public-facing narrative designed to humanize and endear the couple to the global audience, while the behind-the-scenes truth adheres to the meticulous practices expected of the British royal family. The discrepancy between Harry's memoir, Meghan's interviews, and the royal insiders' accounts presents a complex puzzle for observers and critics alike. In Spare, Harry emphasizes the personal and sentimental aspects of the ring, framing the design as an intimate act of remembrance and devotion. In contrast, Meghan's Botswana account highlights agency, collaboration, and mutual decision-making. The insider's London-based narrative prioritizes procedural accuracy, tradition, and adherence to royal protocol. These three versions of the story, while overlapping in some details, diverge significantly in emphasis, perspective, and narrative framing. Graham Norton, in his live interrogation of Harry, seized on these inconsistencies to challenge the memoir's credibility. He presented the three accounts side by side, questioning why the memoir omitted key details about the ring's acquisition, design process, and geographical context. Why did Harry choose to focus solely on the sentimental aspects of Diana's diamonds while downplaying or omitting the collaborative nature of the Botswana experience? Why was there no mention of Cleave and Company, the jeweler who formally created the ring? Norton's line of questioning was incisive and pointed, highlighting the tension between personal narrative, public storytelling, and factual consistency. The discussion around the engagement ring also underscores broader themes about control, image, and narrative curation. Engagement rings are deeply symbolic objects, representing not only personal commitment, but also social expectation, public perception, and cultural tradition. In Harry's account, the ring becomes a vessel for storytelling, a tangible artifact through which he communicates his values, memory, and devotion. By centering the narrative on Diana's diamonds and the personal symbolism of the design, Harry crafts a story that emphasizes emotion, nostalgia, and continuity. In doing so, however, he may unintentionally obscure other factual elements, creating tension between narrative flourish and historical accuracy. Critics argue that this selective storytelling reflects a broader pattern in Spare, where personal narrative is prioritized over strict factual consistency. The memoir is, after all, a subjective account, written from Harry's perspective and shaped by his experiences, memories, and emotional lens. Yet when discrepancies arise between a memoir and established facts or prior public statements, audiences naturally question the reliability of the narrative. The engagement ring, as a high-profile symbol of the couple's relationship, becomes a focal point for such scrutiny, with each variation in story offering insight into the complex interplay between memory, narrative construction, and public image. Furthermore, the engagement ring narrative intersects with public fascination over Harry and Meghan's departure from traditional royal life. By presenting a story in which personal sentiment and intimate design choices are foreground, Harry positions the couple as modern, emotionally expressive, and independent-minded, contrasting with the structured, hierarchical, and procedural nature of traditional royal engagements. The inclusion of Diana's diamonds adds a layer of emotional weight and historical continuity, linking the couple's modern love story to the royal legacy of the past. In doing so, Harry crafts a narrative that appeals to global audiences while subtly reinforcing themes of personal agency, familial memory, and emotional depth. The divergence between the memoir, Meghan's interviews, and insider accounts also illuminates the challenges of public storytelling in the age of constant media scrutiny. Every detail, from the design to the acquisition location, is subject to public interpretation, analysis, and judgment. By presenting a narrative that emphasizes sentimental elements while downplaying procedural or logistical details, Harry navigates a complex landscape in which personal storytelling, public expectation, and media analysis intersect. The engagement ring becomes not merely a gift, but a case study in how high-profile individuals craft, manage, and defend their personal narratives. It is also worth noting the role of audience perception in shaping the impact of these narratives. Readers and viewers naturally seek coherence, consistency, and authenticity in public storytelling, particularly when the subjects are globally recognized figures. When discrepancies arise, audiences often feel compelled to choose between competing versions, evaluate credibility, and interpret intent. In the case of the engagement ring, the differences between Harry's memoir, Meghan's accounts, and royal insider reports prompt questions about narrative control, selective emphasis, and the role of personal memory in shaping public narratives. The scrutiny surrounding the ring also intersects with broader conversations about privacy, media influence, and public expectation. Engagement rings, as intimate and symbolic objects, occupy a liminal space between private significance and public spectacle. Harry and Meghan's story exemplifies this tension, with the couple's personal choices subject to intense global attention, analysis, and debate. Graham Norton's interrogation on live television brought this tension into sharp relief, highlighting how narrative choices can reinforce, challenge, or complicate public perception, particularly when high-profile figures navigate complex personal histories under constant scrutiny. Moreover, the engagement ring debate reflects the challenges of balancing emotional truth with factual precision. Harry's memoir prioritizes emotional resonance, weaving a narrative that emphasizes his love, devotion, and the personal symbolism of the ring. Meghan's Botswana account emphasizes collaboration and mutual decision-making, while the insider account foregrounds procedural accuracy and adherence to royal norms. Each version of the story offers insight into different priorities, perspectives, and narrative strategies, highlighting the multiplicity of truths that can coexist around a single event or object. Graham Norton's confrontation exposed the inherent tension between storytelling, memory, and public expectation, revealing how small discrepancies can provoke intense scrutiny and debate. The engagement ring, though seemingly a minor detail, became a lens through which audiences could examine broader questions about authenticity, narrative construction, and the interplay between private experience and public storytelling. In challenging Harry to reconcile these accounts, Norton illuminated the stakes involved in crafting a memoir that must satisfy both personal truth and global scrutiny. The discussion surrounding The Ring also illuminates how narrative emphasis can shape public interpretation. By centering the story on Diana's diamonds and the sentimental aspects of The Ring's design, Harry invites readers to view the engagement as a deeply personal and emotional event, linking past and present, memory and legacy. This emphasis shapes perception, creating an emotionally compelling narrative that resonates with audiences while simultaneously generating debate over factual precision. The narrative choices around The Ring exemplify the broader challenges of storytelling, memory, and perception that pervade Spare and the couple's public engagements. Finally, the engagement ring story illustrates how high-profile figures navigate narrative authority, control, and interpretation. Harry's memoir asserts a particular perspective. Meghan's interviews provide complementary yet differing viewpoints, and royal insiders offer procedural clarification. The interaction of these accounts creates a multifaceted narrative, inviting audiences to engage critically, assess credibility, and consider the implications of narrative emphasis and discrepancy. The engagement ring, in this context, becomes both a symbol of personal devotion and a touchstone for broader conversations about memory, storytelling, and the construction of public narratives. In conclusion, the story of Meghan Markle's engagement ring, as presented in Harry's memoir and scrutinized by Graham Norton, reflects the intricate interplay between personal memory, narrative construction, and public perception. The discrepancies between the memoir, Meghan's interviews, and insider accounts illuminate the challenges of presenting emotionally resonant, yet factually consistent narratives, particularly for figures whose lives are under intense global scrutiny. The engagement ring serves as both a symbol of personal devotion and a case study in narrative control, highlighting the complex dynamics of storytelling, public expectation, and memory in shaping audience interpretation and understanding. Through this lens, audiences gain a deeper appreciation of the narrative craft involved in Spare and the broader implications of narrative divergence for credibility, perception, and legacy. The rift between Prince Harry and Prince William has been a focal point of public speculation for years, with their relationship portrayed alternately as loving and collaborative or strained and contentious, depending on the source. In Spare, Harry provides a vivid and startling account of a physical altercation with his older brother, describing a confrontation at Nottingham Cottage in 2019 that he recalls with intense emotion. According to Harry, the argument escalated to the point where William allegedly pushed him onto a dog bowl, an act that transformed what might have been a private disagreement into a dramatic and highly personal moment of familial conflict. Harry presents the story as both shocking and symbolic, illustrating the pressure, tension, and emotional weight that has shaped his life within the royal family. The confrontation is depicted as a culmination of years of unspoken resentment, misunderstanding, and the immense scrutiny under which the brothers have lived. Yet, when this account is compared to past interviews and public statements, the contrast is stark. In a 2019 interview with Tom Bradby for ITV, Harry discussed his relationship with William in significantly softer terms, emphasizing that they were simply on different paths and framing their differences as emotional rather than physical. In that interview, he downplayed any notion of a violent altercation, focusing instead on the natural evolution of sibling relationships and the pressures of royal life. This portrayal presents a narrative of emotional distance, personal growth, and adjustment to circumstance, rather than the vivid and confrontational depiction in Spare. The discrepancy between these accounts raises immediate questions for observers and critics alike. Why would Harry withhold the more dramatic version of the story until the publication of his memoir? What motivated the transformation of an emotionally charged yet non-physical disagreement into an alleged physical confrontation involving his brother? These questions touch on the broader themes of memory, narrative construction, and the responsibilities of public storytelling, particularly when the subjects are as globally recognized as members of the British royal family. Graham Norton, aware of the sensitivity and the stakes involved, confronted Harry on live television with these inconsistencies. He presented the 2019 interview alongside the memoir's account, asking Harry directly why the narrative had shifted so dramatically. Norton's questioning was precise, methodical, and unapologetically public, highlighting the challenge for Harry to reconcile his past public statements with the intimate and detailed memories presented in his book. For the audience, this confrontation was electrifying. A prince, previously portrayed as reserved and measured, was now facing a direct challenge to his credibility regarding one of the most personal and potentially damaging events in his recent life. The alleged altercation itself is significant not merely for the physicality, but for its symbolic weight. Nottingham Cottage, the setting for the confrontation, has been depicted as a relatively modest and private residence within Kensington Palace, offering a domestic and intimate backdrop for a story of sibling conflict. By situating the altercation in this setting, Harry emphasizes the personal stakes and the intrusion of family tension into spaces that are typically private and safe. The dog bowl, a seemingly trivial object, becomes a focal point, symbolizing both vulnerability and humiliation in the narrative. The imagery evokes a sense of immediacy and realism, allowing readers to visualize the event and feel the intensity of the confrontation as if they were present. Critics, however, have been quick to question the timing and motivation behind the memoir's revelation. In the context of Spare, the story of the fight serves multiple narrative functions. It heightens dramatic tension, reinforces the portrayal of Harry as a beleaguered and misunderstood royal, and underscores the contrast between his experiences and the public perception of a harmonious royal family. The delayed disclosure of the physical confrontation can be interpreted as a storytelling choice, designed to maximize emotional impact and to position Harry's narrative as revelatory and intimate. Yet, this choice also opens the memoir to scrutiny, with observers questioning why an event described as so significant in the book was previously omitted or softened in public interviews. The tension between narrative and reality is further complicated by the broader public interest in the relationship between Harry and William. The media has long speculated about rivalry, miscommunication, and differing perspectives on duty, tradition, and personal freedom. By including the alleged altercation in Spare, Harry contributes to this ongoing narrative, adding depth, specificity, and, for some, controversy. The story becomes a touchstone for broader discussions about sibling relationships under the pressure of royal expectation, the impact of media scrutiny, and the ways in which personal conflicts are mediated through public storytelling. Graham Norton's role in this discussion was crucial, as he provided a platform for critical inquiry that transcended mere commentary. By juxtaposing Harry's memoir account with earlier interviews, Norton highlighted the tension between emotional truth and factual consistency, forcing both the prince and the audience to confront the complexities inherent in personal narrative. This approach underscores the responsibilities of public figures in crafting memoirs that balance emotional resonance with historical accuracy, particularly when those figures occupy highly visible and symbolic roles. The altercation also invites consideration of the psychological and emotional dimensions of royal life. The pressures faced by Harry and William are extraordinary. Constant media attention, intense public scrutiny, and expectations of comportment and decorum. These pressures can magnify conflicts, distort perceptions, and influence how events are remembered and recounted. Harry's depiction of the fight in Spare can be read as a reflection of these pressures, a narrative lens through which he conveys the intensity, frustration, and emotional toll of life within the royal family. The physicality of the alleged confrontation may symbolize deeper emotional rifts, unspoken grievances, and the struggle to reconcile personal identity with familial duty. It is also notable how the narrative framing differs between the memoir and public statements. In the memoir, the fight is portrayed as dramatic, almost cinematic, with vivid descriptions that capture both physicality and emotion. In contrast, the public interview frames the disagreement as emotional and developmental, emphasizing understanding, growth, and the natural evolution of relationships. This difference highlights the duality of public and private storytelling. The memoir offers a subjective, intimate perspective, while public statements are constrained by diplomacy, privacy concerns, and reputational considerations. The timing of the memoir's revelation adds another layer of complexity. By publishing the account after several public interviews had already shaped the narrative of their relationship, Harry introduces a reinterpretation of events that challenges established perceptions. This retrospective framing allows him to provide context, emotional depth, and specificity that may not have been appropriate or safe to disclose earlier. However, it also invites scrutiny regarding motive, credibility, and selective disclosure, as critics may question why such a dramatic event was not mentioned in previous statements. Furthermore, the story raises broader questions about memory and perception. Human recollection is inherently subjective, shaped by emotion, context, and the passage of time. What Harry remembers and chooses to emphasize and spare may differ from how he framed the event in real-time interviews, not necessarily as an intentional deception, but as a reflection of evolving perspective and narrative intent. Memory is fluid, and the way experiences are internalized, interpreted, and recounted can change over time, particularly under the intense scrutiny and reflection that public life imposes. Graham Norton's probing questions also illuminated the interpersonal dynamics at play. By directly challenging Harry on the differences between past interviews and the memoir, Norton encouraged viewers to consider the implications of selective storytelling, narrative framing, and the interplay between private conflict and public perception. The confrontation exemplified the tension between intimacy and transparency, showing how moments of personal conflict can become emblematic of larger issues when recounted in a global arena. Finally, the fight story, while shocking in its immediate content, serves as a lens for examining broader themes in Harry's life and memoir. It underscores the difficulty of maintaining authentic relationships under extraordinary pressure, the challenge of narrating personal experience for public consumption, and the ways in which memory and narrative intersect. The confrontation is both literal and symbolic, representing sibling rivalry, the struggle for personal agency, and the complexities of life within a highly visible, tradition-bound institution. In conclusion, the story of the fight between Harry and William at Nottingham Cottage encapsulates the tension between personal narrative, public perception, and factual consistency. In Spare, Harry presents a vivid, emotionally charged account that contrasts sharply with previous interviews and public statements, raising questions about memory, narrative intent, and the responsibilities of public storytelling. Graham Norton's interrogation highlighted these discrepancies, providing a critical lens through which audiences could evaluate the memoir, the prince's perspective, and the interplay between emotion, recollection, and public narrative. The fight story is not merely an isolated incident. It is emblematic of the broader dynamics at play in Harry's life, reflecting the pressures, conflicts, and narrative challenges inherent in navigating personal and public identity within the royal family. Through this lens, the audience gains a deeper understanding of the complexities, contradictions, and emotional intensity that shape both Spare and the ongoing narrative surrounding Harry and William's relationship. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 was a moment that shook not only the British royal family, but the entire world. For Prince Harry, who was only 12 years old at the time, the event was life-altering, a traumatic intersection of personal grief and global scrutiny. In Spare, Harry recounts the morning he was awakened at Balmoral Castle by his father, Prince Charles, who, according to Harry, gently broke the news with words intended to cushion the blow. "Darling boy, Mummy's been in a car crash." Harry presents this memory as vivid and immediate, filled with the clarity and emotional weight of a moment seared into memory. The description portrays not only the content of what was said but the manner in which it was delivered, emphasizing Charles's attempt at tenderness in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Yet, when this account is compared to previous interviews and public recollections, inconsistencies emerge that have drawn both critical and public attention. In the 2017 BBC documentary Diana, Our Mother, Harry stated that his memories of that period were fragmented and largely inaccessible. He recalled walking behind his mother's coffin, overwhelmed by shock and grief, and acknowledged that he had actively blocked certain memories to cope with the trauma. In that narrative, there was no mention of a calm, gentle revelation from Charles. The focus was on the disorientation and emotional tumult that accompanied her death, underscoring the dissonance between a child's immediate emotional response and the way events are later recounted as adult reflection. This divergence between past statements and the account in Spare has fueled discussions about the reliability of memory, particularly under the extraordinary conditions of loss, grief, and intense public attention. Critics argue that the memoir presents a constructed narrative, carefully designed to convey emotional depth and personal insight, while earlier accounts emphasize the chaotic and traumatic nature of the event, suggesting that recollection and narrative intent are not always aligned. Supporters, however, point out that memories can evolve over time, becoming more detailed or recontextualized as individuals process grief and trauma, making the differences in accounts understandable rather than deliberately misleading. The context surrounding Harry's recollection is crucial to understanding both the memoir and the broader narrative of his life. At 12, Harry was thrust into a media maelstrom that followed his mother's death. Photographers, journalists, and onlookers surrounded the royal family, capturing and disseminating images of grief that would define public perception of the prince's mourning. Within this environment, Harry's memories of that day were not only personal, but also publicly mediated, filtered through the lens of global attention and media framing. The act of writing Spare decades later allowed him to reconstruct and contextualize these memories in a way that was both personal and reflective, but it also opened the door to scrutiny over whether the narrative aligned with previous statements. Graham Norton, in his televised confrontation, highlighted these discrepancies with precision, contrasting Harry's vivid narrative in the memoir with the earlier documentary's portrayal of fragmented recollection. Norton's questioning was direct and unflinching, pressing Harry to explain why the account in Spare suggested a level of clarity and detail that he had previously denied possessing. This confrontation was striking, not only because it challenged Harry's credibility, but also because it forced a public examination of the intersection between trauma, memory, and storytelling. For viewers, it was a rare glimpse into the tension between lived experience and narrative construction, revealing how public figures navigate the complexities of recounting personal history under scrutiny. The way Harry frames this memory in Spare also serves a broader narrative purpose. By presenting a clear and intimate recollection of Charles's words and demeanor, Harry emphasizes both his personal loss and the emotional dynamics of the royal household. The description humanizes Charles, portraying him as attempting to provide comfort, while simultaneously highlighting the vulnerability of Harry as a young boy confronting a world-altering tragedy. The memoir's account transforms the moment into a tableau of emotional resonance, situating personal grief within the wider context of family, public expectation, and historical significance. Yet, this framing is not without controversy. Observers have noted that the discrepancy between earlier statements and the memoir's account raises questions about selective memory, narrative shaping, and the potential for embellishment. By presenting a detailed and emotionally charged recollection that differs from prior public accounts, Harry invites both empathy and skepticism. The challenge lies in balancing the authenticity of subjective experience with the expectations of factual consistency, particularly when the audience includes both the general public and those with intimate knowledge of the events described. The emotional intensity of the day is further compounded by Harry's dual role as both a child experiencing profound personal loss and a public figure under constant observation. At Balmoral, he was expected to conform to royal protocols, maintain composure, and navigate the complex emotional landscape of grief alongside his brother and father. The memoir emphasizes these dual pressures, suggesting that the impact of Diana's death was not only psychological, but also relational, shaping Harry's understanding of family dynamics, personal identity, and the burdens of royal expectation. Memory, grief, and narrative construction intersect in compelling ways in this account. Harry's decision to describe the moment with such clarity and specificity in Spare may reflect both the passage of time and the therapeutic act of writing. Memoirs often serve as tools for processing trauma, reconstructing fragmented experiences, and establishing narrative coherence. By articulating a detailed recollection of Charles's words and demeanor, Harry is not merely recounting an event. He is interpreting it, situating it within a broader personal and familial narrative that spans decades. Critics, however, question the timing and selective disclosure of these memories. Why, they ask, was a detailed and emotionally vivid recollection withheld until the publication of Spare? The debate touches on broader issues of narrative strategy, audience engagement, and the responsibilities of public storytelling. While the memoir allows for deep personal reflection and emotional candor, it also exposes the author to scrutiny over consistency, credibility, and motive, especially when earlier statements appear to conflict with later recollections. Graham Norton's interrogation exemplified the tension inherent in this kind of storytelling. By juxtaposing the memoir with the earlier documentary, he highlighted the discrepancies, prompting Harry to address the challenges of recounting traumatic experiences under intense public scrutiny. Norton's approach forced a public reckoning with the fluidity of memory, the subjective nature of narrative, and the ethical dimensions of memoir writing for figures whose lives are both deeply personal and globally visible. The impact of Diana's death on Harry's development cannot be overstated. The memoir depicts not only the immediate shock and grief, but also the long-term effects on his psychological and emotional well-being. Harry describes feelings of vulnerability, confusion, and a heightened awareness of mortality and loss. These experiences are interwoven with the pressures of royal duty, media attention, and personal identity, creating a complex matrix of influences that shaped his worldview, relationships, and later choices. The memoir also explores the relational dynamics within the royal family in the aftermath of Diana's death. Harry's depiction of Charles's attempt to gently break the news contrasts with his own feelings of isolation and the broader media frenzy surrounding the family. This contrast underscores the challenges of maintaining personal intimacy and emotional support within a family whose every moment is subject to public scrutiny. The memoir positions this moment as formative, influencing Harry's understanding of trust, protection, and the role of family in navigating trauma. Furthermore, the account invites reflection on the broader societal and cultural dimensions of Diana's death. As a global figure, Diana's life and passing had profound resonance, shaping public discourse around grief, celebrity, and the responsibilities of public figures. Harry's memoir situates his personal experience within this larger context, highlighting both the intimate and public dimensions of loss. The narrative demonstrates how personal grief is intertwined with collective memory, media representation, and historical significance, making the account both deeply personal and culturally resonant. In conclusion, the moment Harry learned of his mother's death, as recounted in Spare, is a rich, emotionally charged episode that illuminates the complexities of memory, trauma, and public narrative. The vividness and specificity of the account contrast with earlier statements, prompting questions about narrative construction, credibility, and the evolution of memory over time. Graham Norton's confrontation brought these issues to the forefront, compelling both Harry and the audience to grapple with the tension between subjective experience and factual consistency. The account underscores the profound impact of Diana's death on Harry's life, shaping his emotional development, relationships, and perspective on the interplay between personal experience and public scrutiny. It is a moment that exemplifies the challenges of narrating personal tragedy within a global spotlight, highlighting both the vulnerability of the individual and the expectations imposed by public life. The tension between Meghan Markle and Kate Middleton leading up to the royal wedding was rumored to be palpable long before the public was aware. In Spare, Harry recounts a particular incident involving the bridesmaid dresses for Princess Charlotte and other young attendants, portraying a moment of high emotional intensity that, according to his account, left Meghan in tears. Harry's version suggests that Kate confronted Meghan about the choice of dress for Charlotte, expressing displeasure over the design or perhaps the timing of decisions. Meghan's reaction, as described in the memoir, was one of distress, culminating in an emotional episode where she reportedly cried over the perceived criticism. For Harry, this moment was emblematic of the underlying pressures Meghan faced when navigating the royal family's expectations, traditions, and unspoken codes. The incident, as recounted in the memoir, paints a vivid tableau. A young bride, already under immense scrutiny and stress, confronted with criticism from her future sister-in-law, someone whose own royal pedigree and experience might have amplified the perceived judgment. Harry presents the scene with cinematic clarity, detailing Meghan's emotional response, the exchanges between the two women, and the palpable tension that seemed to fill the room. According to Harry, this was more than a minor disagreement. It represented the clash of personalities, traditions, and expectations that would continue to characterize Meghan's integration into royal life. However, when compared with Meghan's own recounting of the same event in her 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, a different narrative emerges. In that televised interview, Meghan implied that it was Kate who had made her cry, though she emphasized that the incident was ultimately resolved through an apology. The framing is crucial. In Meghan's account, the emotional weight is present, but the focus shifts from a confrontation over wedding protocol to a personal interaction that was eventually smoothed over. The implication is that any initial tension was mitigated by acknowledgement and reconciliation, highlighting Meghan's perspective on conflict resolution and her understanding of the relational dynamics at play within the royal family. Adding to the complexity are accounts from palace staff and insiders, many of whom leaked details in the months following the wedding. Some corroborated elements of both Harry and Meghan's stories, while others introduced entirely new nuances or perspectives. In these accounts, the incident was neither as dramatic as Harry described nor entirely benign as Meghan framed it. Staff recollections suggested a series of minor disagreements and moments of tension, typical of any high-pressure wedding involving multiple stakeholders, each with their own vision for how the ceremony and associated traditions should unfold. The varying accounts illustrate the challenges of reconstructing events in a setting where multiple perceptions, personal biases, and media attention intersect. Graham Norton, in his televised confrontation, seized upon these discrepancies, pressing Harry to explain why his narrative in Spare seemed to elevate a relatively ordinary pre-wedding disagreement into a highly dramatic moment. Norton's questions were incisive. Why frame the interaction as an emotionally charged confrontation that left Meghan in tears when Meghan's own account suggested resolution and empathy? Was the moment emblematic of a broader pattern of tension, or was it selectively amplified for narrative effect? These inquiries struck at the heart of the memoir's credibility, highlighting the difficulty of balancing compelling storytelling with factual consistency, especially in the public eye. The bridesmaid dress incident, while seemingly minor, is illustrative of a larger pattern identified by critics. The potential reshaping of events to heighten dramatic tension, underscore personal narratives, or reinforce particular thematic arcs within the memoir. In Spare, the episode serves multiple purposes. It humanizes Meghan, presenting her as vulnerable yet resilient, navigating an unfamiliar and often unforgiving environment. It also positions Harry as both observer and protector, witnessing the pressures his wife faced and attempting to contextualize them for the reader. By emphasizing the emotional stakes, Harry transforms a pre-wedding logistical disagreement into a moment that conveys insight into family dynamics, power structures, and the psychological pressures associated with royal life. Analyzing the incident also requires an understanding of the broader cultural and media context surrounding Meghan and Kate. The media often portrayed Kate as a model of calm, poised, and traditionally royal demeanor, while Meghan was depicted as an outsider attempting to navigate entrenched protocols. These portrayals influenced public perception and, arguably, the framing of events within the memoir. Harry's account can be seen as both a reflection on this media narrative and a corrective attempt to provide his perspective, adding depth to public understanding of what were otherwise simplified or sensationalized media reports. The clash over the bridesmaid dress also highlights the challenges of narrative subjectivity. Each participant, the bride, the sister-in-law, the groom, and palace staff, experienced the event differently. Harry's memoir captures his interpretation, filtered through his role as husband, observer, and protector. Meghan's interview captures her interpretation, shaped by her own emotions, reflections, and desire to convey authenticity. Staff recollections capture yet another layer, influenced by proximity, loyalty, and professional perspective. Reconciling these narratives is inherently complex, and the discrepancies that emerge are as much a function of human perception as they are of deliberate narrative shaping. This moment is emblematic of how seemingly minor events can take on outsized significance in memoirs and media narratives. For Harry, the bridesmaid dress clash was more than a logistical dispute. It symbolized the pressures Meghan faced and the broader challenges of integrating into a centuries-old institution with rigid expectations. For critics, however, the focus is on consistency. Why present the incident in a way that differs from previous accounts? And what does this suggest about the memoir's overall reliability? The interplay between personal experience and public narrative underscores the difficulties inherent in documenting events that are simultaneously private and publicly scrutinized. Moreover, the incident sheds light on the emotional labor expected of royal family members, particularly women navigating public and private spheres. Meghan's reactions, whether depicted as tearful or composed, highlight the intensity of scrutiny placed upon her. Harry's recounting emphasizes empathy and protective instinct, presenting a lens through which readers can understand not just the event itself, but the broader pressures exerted on individuals within the royal family. The bridesmaid dress becomes a narrative device, encapsulating the intersection of personal emotion, institutional expectation, and public perception. The media coverage that followed also influenced how the incident was framed in the public consciousness. Rumors, leaks, and speculative reporting amplified tension and contributed to a narrative in which minor conflicts were portrayed as indicative of deeper rifts. Harry's memoir interacts with this media landscape, attempting to assert his perspective and provide context, while inevitably drawing scrutiny for how the story aligns or misaligns with prior statements and public perception. The interplay between personal recollection and media representation is central to understanding the complexities of this moment. Graham Norton's confrontation underscored the stakes of these discrepancies. By juxtaposing Harry's memoir with Meghan's interview and Palace Insider accounts, he highlighted the ways in which narrative framing, selective emphasis, and personal perspective shaped the stories told about public figures. The questioning forced Harry to confront not just the factual elements of the event, but the interpretive choices he made in recounting it. The exchange illuminated the tension between compelling storytelling and fidelity to multiple perspectives, a dynamic that resonates throughout the memoir. Ultimately, the bridesmaid dress clash is a microcosm of the broader narrative tensions that define Spare. It exemplifies the challenges of documenting events that are simultaneously intimate, public, and emotionally charged. The discrepancies between Harry's account, Meghan's account, and staff recollections reflect the complexity of human memory and the interpretive choices inherent in memoir writing. They also underscore the difficulties faced by public figures in balancing authenticity, narrative coherence, and audience expectation. In conclusion, the bridesmaid dress incident serves multiple purposes within Harry's memoir. It humanizes Meghan, contextualizes the pressures of royal life, and provides a narrative through line that illustrates the emotional stakes faced by both Harry and Meghan. At the same time, it highlights the challenges of reconciling differing perspectives, navigating public scrutiny, and maintaining narrative consistency. Graham Norton's televised confrontation brought these issues into sharp relief, compelling viewers to consider not only the event itself, but the broader implications for memoir writing, memory, and the construction of public narrative. The incident, while small in its immediate scope, encapsulates the tensions, pressures, and interpretive choices that define the intersection of personal experience and public storytelling within the context of the modern monarchy. The story of how Prince Harry first met Meghan Markle has been a subject of fascination, debate, and intense media scrutiny for years. In his memoir Spare, Harry recounts that his initial awareness of Meghan came in 2016 through a relatively modern and informal channel, Instagram. According to Harry, he saw Meghan in a video posted by a mutual friend, with the added whimsy of a Snapchat dog filter, a playful and lighthearted moment that immediately caught his attention. The description paints a picture of an initial spark ignited not through traditional social channels or formal introductions, but via the digital ecosystem that characterizes modern relationships and social connections. For readers, this narrative offers a blend of contemporary charm and personal insight, demonstrating how even members of the royal family, often bound by centuries of tradition, are influenced by the immediacy and casual nature of social media interactions. However, this narrative in Spare diverges significantly from the account presented by Harry and Meghan during their engagement interview in 2017. In that widely publicized interview, the couple described their meeting as the result of a blind date arranged by a mutual friend, with no mention of Instagram or social media precursors. The framing in this earlier account emphasizes serendipity and intention, presenting the encounter as carefully orchestrated, almost storybook-like, a classic romantic setup that aligns with traditional expectations of royal romance. The contrast between the Instagram origin story and the blind date narrative has fueled speculation among critics and commentators, who question why the story evolved and whether the shift reflects a deliberate attempt to craft a more compelling or modern narrative in the memoir. This discrepancy has been characterized by some observers as an example of narrative reshaping for dramatic effect. In Spare, the Instagram anecdote serves several functions. First, it situates the story firmly within a contemporary context, signaling to readers that this is a romance unfolding in the age of social media rather than within a strictly traditional royal framework. Second, it imbues the moment with intimacy and immediacy. Harry notices Meghan in a casual, playful video, capturing a sense of organic curiosity and instant connection. Third, it emphasizes Harry's perspective, positioning him as an observer whose personal impression of Meghan sparks the initial attraction, rather than focusing on the mechanics of an arranged meeting or third-party facilitation. Critics argue, however, that the divergence between this Instagram account and the earlier engagement interview raises questions about reliability and consistency. Why would a memoir present a different origin story than previously stated? One theory suggests that the Instagram anecdote enhances the narrative appeal, making the initial encounter more relatable and modern, particularly for audiences attuned to social media culture. Another perspective posits that Harry's recounting reflects a personal, internalized memory that differs from the externally presented engagement story, highlighting the subjective nature of recollection and the complex interplay between memory, perception, and narrative intention. The media's reaction to this discrepancy was immediate and intense. Headlines questioned whether Harry was altering the story for dramatic effect or attempting to recast the royal romance in terms more aligned with contemporary sensibilities. Pundits dissected every word of both accounts, comparing phrasing, timing, and context to identify inconsistencies. Social media platforms amplified the debate, with memes, commentary, and viral threads scrutinizing the implications of the Instagram origin story versus the blind date narrative. This public reaction underscores the challenges faced by public figures, particularly royals, in navigating personal storytelling within the hyper-visible environment of global media attention. From a psychological perspective, the difference in narratives can also be interpreted through the lens of memory reconstruction. Human memory is inherently malleable, shaped by subsequent experiences, emotional states, and social influences. Harry's recollection of noticing Meghan on Instagram may not be a deliberate fabrication, but rather a genuine reflection of his retrospective memory, reframed over time to emphasize certain elements or to provide coherence within the broader arc of the memoir. Similarly, the engagement interview represents a carefully curated, public-facing narrative designed to convey romance, compatibility, and mutual respect to a global audience. The interplay between private memory and public presentation is central to understanding why such discrepancies arise, particularly in the high-stakes context of royal storytelling. Graham Norton's confrontation on his show brought this issue to a new level of public scrutiny. Norton, known for his incisive questioning and ability to elicit candid responses, directly addressed the apparent inconsistency, presenting the receipts from both the memoir and the engagement interview. He asked Harry to explain why the story had changed, highlighting the tension between the Instagram anecdote and the blind date account. The exchange was marked by both intensity and subtle humor, as Norton's questioning forced Harry to articulate a rationale for the divergence while maintaining composure under live scrutiny. For viewers, this moment was both revelatory and dramatic, underscoring the ways in which personal storytelling intersects with public accountability and media exposure. Harry's response, as captured in clips of the show, sought to contextualize the difference. He explained that noticing Meghan on Instagram did not preclude the involvement of a mutual friend or the arrangement of a blind date. Rather, the Instagram moment represented an initial awareness, a spark of curiosity that preceded the formal introduction. This explanation attempts to reconcile the two narratives, presenting them not as contradictory, but as sequential stages in the process of meeting and forming a connection. Nevertheless, for critics, the attempt at reconciliation raised further questions about why the memoir emphasized Instagram so prominently and whether the framing was intended to appeal to a contemporary audience accustomed to digital-first storytelling.